Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to already another deck tech. I actually will postpone the first metagame breakdown a bit since we don't really have a lot of master data yet, and I don't think there's much point in looking at like the entire data, and I don't have access to Mobalytics Premium, so I can't filter by like platinum upwards or whatever to do it that way. So I'll wait till we have a bit more data and the metagame has a bit more settled, which also will be more useful because having kind of like this all over the place metagame breakdown, which doesn't really tell us much and things change heavily when they settle half a week or a week later, then the breakdown wasn't very helpful. So I feel like it makes sense to wait a bit. But I have a couple of interesting and promising decks that I want to share with you guys. From my climb to masters, I'm almost there. I'm like high diamond 2. I'm bouncing around between like mid diamond 1 and mid diamond 2 currently the last 2 days. So yeah, I want to share my latest highlight with you. I've started messing with Heimerdinger I after seeing that Alan hit rank 1 on EU with a similar list, and I borrowed a bit of inspiration from his list, but my list is a bit different for a couple of reasons. To be fair, like 90% of these lists kind of build themselves because they include like the obvious good Targon and the obvious good PNC cards, but he had a pretty interesting tech choice that I probably wouldn't have ended up with myself that I really liked and embraced. But we'll talk about all of this in a moment when I show you the list. Before we do so, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below if you haven't yet to not miss out on future content like this and the next metagame breakdown and stuff like that. Alright, so let's take a look. So basically, it's structured similar to what you would expect from like a Vi Heimerdinger deck, except this time it has Targon instead of Ionia, because we actually got a couple of pretty nice tools here, and Ionia lost a bunch of its tools over the time, especially Will of Ionia and the nerf to Solitary Monk and Shadow Assassin were like the last 3 that kind of ultimately X'd the Ionia direction. And Targon has a bunch of really good spells, especially the cantrips and stuff, and the buff to goat and so on, that make it pretty appealing. So let's talk about the units. Obviously we have goat. It's a pretty great 2-drop. The other option usually in these decks are either, where are they? Give me a second. Campunk Pickpocket, kind of like the traditional one. It needs to strike the Nexus to give you a card, but then it obviously gives you a better card. So it's in a way a bit worse goat with a higher ceiling and a lower floor, which is why it makes sense to run goat over Pickpocket. And the other one that you potentially see is Claws of the Dragon. Where are they? Oh, actually you don't see Claws of the Dragon because they are Ionia and we don't have access to these. So it's basically Campunk Pickpocket or Mountain Goat, and Mountain Goat is basically a better pickpocket, especially when we're running Get Excited and Dredger, but we'll talk about it in a moment. Then we have Solitary Priestess. Yeah, Solari Priestess makes a lot of sense in a deck like this. It adds a lot of utility. It adds a 6-cost spell for Heimerdinger Elusive. It gives you Written in the Stars to find Vi or Heimerdinger. And it gives you some good board presence with the units that you can get with it. Just a pretty flexible card and kind of similar to Shadow Assassin, but a bit more high impact with what it draws, while the body is a bit worse. But not that much worse since Shadow Assassin got nerfed, so there is that. Then we have the Sump Dredger. That's the main thing that I sort of learned from Alan's list, and I really like the direction. It kind of serves a similar purpose as Solitary Monk did. Obviously it's not as good offensively, but it provides more utility by cycling cards that either like free gems or cards that you don't need right now or don't need in the matchup. So helps you find stuff, makes your hand a bit more functional, and is a pretty good like offense body still against reactive decks while being a solid blocker against aggressive decks. So yeah, shout out to Alan for this one. Not sure if I would have ended up with this in the list without his list. It's a pretty cool idea, and I've been very happy with it, so plays pretty well. Good catch on his part. And yeah, then we have Heimerdinger and Vi. Not much to say here. Heimerdinger. The deck is actually a bit less of a Heimerdinger deck than old Heimerdinger decks, in the sense that now it's less of a like I win engine, because your most common units, like your 3-drops, don't have elusive, so they don't end the game as often. So it's more of a grind tool. I feel like it has a bit of a similar role in this deck as Ezreal did in Ezreal Twisted Fate, since it's still a deck with Heimerdinger, and it's a good card, but it's less of a Heimerdinger-centric deck. We also have fewer 3-drops. I still run Flash of Brilliance, something that Alan doesn't, but I'll get to that in a moment. So yeah, the two champions that kind of make the deck work, but you also have additional threat potential from Solari Priestess and Star Shaping Celestials. Alright, so then let's talk about the spells. Removal, pretty straightforward. No PNZ. A deck without reactive deck of this kind, without 3 Beam and 3 Mystic Shot. Then we have the 3 Get Excited that are still pretty good in a Heimerdinger deck. First of all, they work with Heimerdinger on turn 5, and with Flash of Brilliance into Get Excited. They sometimes even help you kill people against reactive decks, which has been quite handy. It's a fairly flexible removal spell, and you can sometimes get rid of like bad rolls from Flash of Brilliance, Heimerdinger turrets, or just free gems from Mountain Goat to mitigate the downside. And that's really all there is for the removal. The good thing is, though, we have Solari Priestess, and to an extent Star Shaping to sometimes give us additional answers, and Hush if you want to count it as a removal. I'm only running 2 Hush. I think Alan had 3. I feel like while I really like 3 in Lee decks, because you really need to like meddle a lot with combat and make sure your Lee doesn't die to combat tricks or the opponent hushing it when you end a combat trick. So Hush is much more important here. Well, here we have a lot less board presence, so the applications are a bit more narrow, but it's still a pretty powerful and flexible card. Makes it easier to deal with Lee and stuff like that. So 2 seems like a good number. I've been fairly happy with 2. Not 100% sure 2 is better than 3, but I'm leaning towards 2 is being better than 3. That was my initial impression, and so far from the games I played, that also seems to be the case, but could be that I change my mind in the future with more testing. So then we have the usual utility spells, Guiding Touch, just very efficient, cheap, and flexible. No reason not to run 3 in a deck like this. Heals up your stuff, especially Vi, pretty well. Also heals yourself when you're under pressure and want to get out of burn range, and it cycles through your deck, so it's pretty great. Same with Pale Cascade, just an absurdly powerful card and hard to justify not running 3. And we have Flash of Brilliance. Alan, I think, had Spring Guardian in that place, this 3/3 that gives you a 1-cost spell that heals up a unit to full. I feel like there's actually not a lot of benefit to healing a unit to full, since most of the units are pretty fragile, other than Vi, and even Vi. Like you get like a 1 mana heal 3 out of it, I guess, which is okay. The 3/3 body is a bit underwhelming, notably worse than some Dredger. Sure, you can cycle away the spell from Guardian with Dredger, or discard it to Get Excited, which is neat. But ultimately, I feel like Flash of Brilliance is still too good with Heimerdinger, and in Targon especially, Flash of Brilliance seems pretty good, because unlike in Ionia, you have much better rolls. You only have 6 rolls, and the worst roll is the 15-cost spell that you can only sometimes play for 13 or 11 with a Celestial out. But even then, you can discard it to Get Excited or some Trigger, and the other rolls are pretty good. Like, let me show you. If you look at it, the second worst roll is Transmogulator, which can still be really great of an answer to cards like Endure and all that stuff, or making a big threat and so on. Just all in all, still pretty solid as a tool to have, even though you wouldn't want to put it in your deck. Sunburst is just a very solid removal, so it gives you additional removal options, and it's a pretty good removal against something like a Lee, unless they have Deny. Because currently they usually don't run Bastion anymore. Then you have Unlicensed Innovation, nothing fancy, but still decent roll, especially against reactive decks where you might need more threats. Two-shot barrage can be pretty nice, especially like on turn 4 with 3 spell mana. You randomly roll it against an aggro deck, you can just win the game, wipe their board, that sort of stuff. It's not a great card, but it's an interesting card to have access to sometimes. Getting Progress Day is obviously great, and then we have the Sky's Descent that I mentioned. So all in all, I've been pretty happy with it. It also has some minor synergies of activating Pale Cascade, buffing Vi, that sort of stuff. So it just has been doing very solid things. Also sometimes it gains your mana if you draw it with like a Progress Day from Heimerdinger or a previous rolled Progress Day, that sort of stuff. There are a couple of like neat interactions that can come up. Then there are 2 Bastion. Alan had 0. Not a big fan of 0. Sure, at 4 the card is notably worse than at 3. So it doesn't work on turn 5 with Heimerdinger anymore, but it's still a good way to protect your Heimerdinger, and it's even better with Vi because the +1 scales so well with her tough, and making Vi also a lot better against Hush, because now Hush is not repeatable. So if you preemptively Bastion a Vi sometimes against Lee, they can't do anything about it, because what they're gonna do, they have barely anything that targets your units, so they have their Hush and that's it. And then all they can do is break the spell shield with the Hush, but not actually Hush Vi, which has been pretty good. So I think 2 are still pretty good, and I think Ellen in that place had like the 3rd Hush and a Static Shock, and I've never been a big fan of Static Shock outside of Ezreal decks. The card's kind of clunky and unwieldy, and I think Bastion adds a lot to the deck. And yeah, I've played quite a bunch with the list, climbed pretty well. Especially on stream yesterday, I was on like a 9-1 run with it. Deck feels really well-rounded and might actually be like a really good deck, a real new top contender. We'll have to see. I'll do more testing, but Ellen is rank 1 with it. I'm doing well with it. There are probably other people doing well with it. I think Sishu is playing it. I'm not sure how he's doing with it, but if I had to guess, probably also good. He's a good player. The deck seems promising. So yeah, there's a lot of potential here, and Heimerdinger might really be back on the map. So and he's like less obnoxious and less toxic than he was last time, but he might still be a really good deck, and the deck might be good not just because of Heimerdinger or as a Heimerdinger deck, but more as a like overall deck with good cards that also includes Heimerdinger, in the same way that Twisted Fate Ezreal was a good deck with Ezreal and not even that good of an Ezreal deck. This deck isn't the best Heimerdinger deck, as in like deck built around Heimerdinger and optimizing Heimerdinger. It's more of a deck with Heimerdinger that gets solid use out of him, but isn't like heavily warped or built around Heimerdinger the same way that old Heimerdinger decks were, like Ionia, Vimer, in part due to the payoff not being that big anymore, because the 3-cost turrets you get are not as good as the old ones. But yeah, I've been really enjoying the deck. I've been having quite a lot of success with it. I think I'm currently like 16-9 or something. Had a bit of a rough hit. I think at the peak I was like 12-1, and hit a bit of a rough patch. So deck is not unbeatable by any means, but I've been doing pretty well against Lee decks, despite me initially thinking it might be a bad matchup. I think I'm like 4-2 or 4-3 against it now. I think 4-3 I was like 4-1 and lost I think 2 games since against it. They were still pretty close, and that's one of the matchups where considering the 3rd Hush definitely makes sense. So that's the one thing that might make me go back to 3 Hush in some way. And yeah, it also seems pretty good against Ledros Trundle. I faced that a couple times and beat it like very convincingly in drawn out games. I've also did alright against aggro, but that's kind of the natural soft spot of these Heimerdinger decks usually. But it seems a little less soft to aggro than old Heimerdinger variants at times. But I haven't played against it that much to be sure. But yeah, deck is really cool, a lot of fun to play, feels pretty like powerful and well-rounded, and also it's something fresh, so that's always cool. So as usual, we're gonna hop into some games. I'll show it to you in action, and we'll get closer to Master in the process, ideally. So I'll see you in a moment with the first game. Stay tuned.